Masters of Reality was a band that was formed back in '81 by frontman Chris Goss and guitarist Tim Harrington in Syracuse, New York. In 2001, the band shared studio and rehearsing space with Queens of the Stone Age. And since Goss and Homme shared similar thoughts and aspirations in rock music, and Goss had been the producer of Homme's earlier band Kyuss, they decided to team up for a brief collaboration. The result was Deep in the Hole, a full-length album released in 2001, and the live album Flak in Flight in 2003. Now, when you think of Josh Homme and Queens side projects, the first names that come to mind are probably Them Crooked Vultures, Iggy Pop, and Desert Sessions, amongst others. But in my opinion, the stuff he, Nick Oliveri, Chris Goss, and John Leamy created with many other notable guests on Deep in the Hole is equally as interesting. Let's figure out what made this Queens Masters collab so outstanding, musically and historically. Now, if you haven't watched Masters of Reality Against the Grain, you need to pause this video right now. This is a brief documentary film about this collab that was recorded back in 2001. I'll put a link to it down in the description. The documentary combines brief interviews with snippets of live and rehearsal recordings in between. Chris, Josh, Queens bassist Nick Oliveri, and Masters drummer John Leamy can be seen chilling and working together at Barefoot Studios. The film provides a great insider's look at why Josh and Chris wanted to collaborate in the first place, and why they decided to part ways so soon as well. Now, if we go back to the very beginning, Chris first met Josh when he and his friends played in the Palm Desert metal band Kyuss. Chris's girlfriend at the time, Cynthia, had gotten their demo in the mail and thought it sounded amazing. So they both went to see them play at a club called the Gaslight in LA back in 1990. And the rest is history. Chris Goss became the band's producer, and the guys stayed in touch ever since. Goss went on to produce Blues for the Red Sun, Welcome to Sky Valley, and The Circus Leaves Town. And when Josh transitioned from Kyuss to his new band, Queens of the Stone Age, he also produced this split EP for him. He later went on to produce several Queens records too, the first one being their breakout album from 2000, Rated R. Now, as you can see, they've worked together for many, many years in the past. But was there anything else that made this collab happen? Well, firstly, they have a similar taste in music. They both love Led Zeppelin and Jimmy Page, and this is probably just one in a series of other bands and guitarists that they bond over. Quote, Jimmy Page is my art hero. That's the musical character that kind of carved the way for me. My music heroes, to me, had that ability to not only rip your body up, but to rip your brain up too. And Jimmy Page was a master of it. End quote. Quote, to me, there's two Jimmys. There's Jimmy Page and Jimi Hendrix. And Jimi Hendrix is the black guy who's like the light, and Jimmy Page is the white guy who's actually the dark. End quote. Now, secondly, I think Homme's humility helped out a lot in terms of strengthening their friendship. When he first started out as a guitarist in Kyuss, he wanted to learn as much as possible from Goss. He knew that he had been in the business for a decade already, and so he stayed open-minded and curious to what he had to teach him. Quote, in hindsight, when I think of a 17-year-old kid hanging with a 32-year-old man, it sort of looks strange, but it never felt strange. We always had similar likes, we were headed down the same road, But he was ahead of me, so I got to, benefit from the road he'd already covered, End quote. The third reason why I think they've collaborated to this extent is because they share the same musical language. From what Goss is saying in this interview, it seems like they find it easy to communicate with each other on a deep musical level. Quote, "We hit a note and we laugh. And there's very few musicians, I've probably worked with 3 or 4 or 5 musicians in my lifetime, to where a note makes you laugh. Josh is one of them. Ginger Baker was one of them. Tim Harrington, the original guitarist of Masters of Reality, I had a musical relationship like that with him too. They were all redheads too. Weird." End quote. Now let's move on to the fruits of their labor. So in between Queens' sophomore album Rated R and the release of the third one, Songs for the Deaf, there was another album released under the Masters of Reality label or name. Deep in the Hole was the fourth Masters album and was theoretically a split between a Queens and Masters record if you look at the lineup. It featured guest artists like Mark Lanigan, Troy Van Leeuwen, Nick Oliveri, and Brendan McNichol, who had all been a part of Queens at some point in the past, or would be in the future. There's no denying the Queens influence on this record. The guitars, the grooves, and the odd melodies share the same charm as the music on Rated R and Songs for the Deaf, which is why I always try to recommend this album to any and all true Queens fans. It's Queens, but with Goss's vocals, and his vocals fit perfectly. Although his lyrics are very abstract, the themes touch on everything from space, transformations, religion, relationships, and a whole lot more. To Goss, it seems like the cadence and the gluing of the words and sounds is the most important element, not bringing a concrete message. At least not in this album anyways. My favorite moments on this record are Scatagoria. I love this song because of the effect in the background of the verses. That sounds just so psychedelic and spacious, but somehow it still manages to capture that desert rock aesthetic. Major Lance is also another amazing and outstanding song on here. It sounds very Beatle-esque in the way it's written in such a careless way. It's also impossible to ignore High Noon Amsterdam. That is one of the big hitters on this album, definitely one of the more hard rock leaning songs. But the mix of Lanigan's vocals and Goss's vocals on here is just fantastic. Shortly said, it's an amazing album that you should definitely check out. Very underrated. Now, Goss and Homme went on separate paths once they finished the work they'd done at Barefoot Studios. Deep in the Hole was released on June 15th, 2001 through Brown House Records. The album didn't get much exposure, but has become a highlight for a lot of hardcore Queens and Masters fans. From the collaboration, they also recorded a live album, as mentioned earlier, known as Flak in Flight, which is also an amazing album. They are just so incredibly good live, so check that out too. The reason why they split up wasn't due to little success or exposure though. It had more to do with some ideas Homme had heard in his head. And those ideas did not include Goss this time around.
I really wanted to do this by myself because I heard it, and I didn't want anyone to dilute it. Not that Chris's would be diluting it, but some things you just have to go alone,
With mutual respect, they went and did their own things. Homme went on to work on what would eventually be known as Songs for the Deaf, while Goss kept on playing shows, producing records, and released Give Us Barabbas some years later. Homme has always had a tendency to cut ties and find new friends to create with consistently. In interviews, he sometimes mentions how he values the process of creating a piece of classic music more than the position as a band leader. And maybe that's the reason why he's always moving on from one lineup to another. He's chasing down a certain combination of sounds, and to get to that combination, he needs a certain combination of individuals to help him. Quote, I don't need to be that frontman or anything. I'd rather be a little part of something cool than a big part of something that sucks. End quote. Goss and Homme are two very like-minded and strong-minded people. But although their admiration for each other's musical ways brought them together, it's their determination to chase sounds that ultimately separated them, at least after making this album. My conclusion here is that you have to check out this album they made together, Deep in the Hole. It's a hidden gem for any Queens of the Stone Age fan. Any hardcore fan or nerd of this band will just love to listen to this, and you will eat it up. I'm quite certain about that. So make sure you do that. Let me know then down in the comments what you think of this album after you've listened to it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and for the future, what Queens of the Stone Age topic should I tackle next? Should I talk about one of their albums? Should I do a deep dive on one of their songs? Should I do some other side project, a video on another Queens of the Stone Age related project? Let me know about that in the comments below. Also, make sure you click the link on the screen or in the description below to check out my Patreon account. I'm gonna post some guitar lessons related to some Queens of the Stone Age songs in a very short time. So be sure to check that out if you're a guitarist and you want to learn some of those. All right, take care. Cheers.